I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
Yeah, the greenhouse is about 60 acres. So call it, for simple numbers, 2.5 million square feet. It's one complete structure, steel and glass. Inside of it, it's a classic Dutch style glass house. We control CO2 levels, we control temperature, we control humidity, we control the light. And because we're LED, we control the light spectrum. And so we can tune the environment to the specific plant and to the specific time of year and to the outside climate and how we want to create our own unique climate inside. So it is absolutely controlled environment agriculture at a very significant scale.
That's Dave Chen, CEO of Equilibrium Capital, in a conversation from Singapore. In the latest in our Institutional Shift series, Dave and I talk food system resilience in the face of climate change and COVID. Let's jump right into the conversation. Hi, Dave.
Hey, how are you?
Great. You're in Singapore, and we're talking obviously over Zoom, which is very common, but what's not common is you've been in quarantine there. What day are you in?
I think I'm on day 13 right now.
Of
14 days.
So you're almost going to be freed. You've been stuck in the hotel room, right? You've been confined to the hotel room.
You know, people think it's exaggerating, but Singapore is one of these countries that really they make rules. And I have been inside a hotel room, not inside a hotel, inside a hotel room now for 13 days.
Literally not going in the hallway, not going down to the lobby, not obviously going outside.
So they drop 3 meals a day at the door. I take my laundry and I put it outside the door.
So you haven't seen another human in the flesh for 2
Not
weeks?
quite. I have seen official representatives of the agencies of the Singaporean government. So every day, the hotel has the responsibility of calling me to ask for my temperature. I was issued a thermometer when I checked in because I didn't bring my own. And then every few days, as I said, a representative of the Singapore government will come to the door, knock, ask me for my passport and verify my identification. What they're also probably secretly doing is looking inside my hotel room to make sure that there's no one there. And then I get a random call from an agency that will start a video call. And what they really want to know is a panning of the room to make sure that I am, in fact, where I say I am. And so it's all these processes to make sure that I am, in fact, staying in my room.
Well, good for you for sticking it out. Now, why are you in Singapore?
I'm here because one of the projects that we've been asked to work on is in the broad context of Singapore has executed a program here that they call Singapore 3030, and that is 30% self-sufficiency on food. And they have very specific classes of food that they want to drive for national security for 30% self-sufficiency by 2030. So in the next 10 years, the country wants to move to being self-sufficient on produce, various kinds of protein, and then executing strategies on preservation, which is elongating and making sure that food is not wasted and that the shelf life of food. So protein, preservation, produce, Singapore 3030. And as you might imagine, Singapore is not a big country. I think, Dave, you looked it up for me. It's 200?
280 square miles or something, 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers or something like that?
Yeah, basically. And so it's not a country where you've got a ton of land. And so you can't do the, Kansas or the Belarus, farms that extend to the horizon kind of thing. So they have a particular set of challenges, and we're here to work on parts of that or help work on that. And it's part because, Equilibrium is, I dare say, the global, investment leader in controlled environment agriculture.
Controlled environment is a fancy word for greenhouses?
Well, I think the reason we use that fancy term is that, yes, greenhouses, vertical farms, but eventually the idea of controlling the environment from an agricultural perspective includes things like alternative proteins, because now we're not land basic. It includes things like aquaculture the farming of fish, and therefore the controlling of the environment upon which we're not using natural systems. And so it's an expansive term, but yes, the here and now is greenhouses and to some extent vertical farms.
Now, somehow, while we've been doing these interviews and institutional shift podcasts over the last few years, as you say, Equilibrium has amassed a portfolio of greenhouses, and you're something like the largest greenhouse operator or greenhouse owner in the world right now.
I think that
We always say one of the largest.
just one of, but we are certainly we are certainly continuing to amass, build. I can say that we're in our portfolio now. We're probably one of the largest collections of construction sites anywhere in the world, and it's our objective to continue that path because we see the controlled environment agriculture as a mega trend of technology driven productivity that's taken place in agriculture. And I think that one of the things that we have benefited from is that between climate change being very real and in some ways COVID, these very conceptual terms that we oftentimes use about food, resiliency of the supply chain, climate adaptation within agriculture. These are all very high level conceptual words. The thing about COVID is that they put a face on a concept. Borders were shut, trains were shut, ships were shut, and so the idea of regional dependence or the creation of regionality in our food system, resilience in our food system, all became very real.
So that's why you're saying Singapore obviously interested in it generally, but even more so when they couldn't get food during the COVID shutdown.
Exactly. Exactly. And here regionally, for example, there was a period in the COVID March, April, when, for example, Vietnam, which is one of the largest rice producers in the world and in this region, certainly, and obviously rice is a staple. It's a daily need in Asia. They constricted their border in terms of export. India shut down their borders for export, not import, but for export, because there were certain vegetables that they considered to be national security, that they needed them more. And so the balance of trade, the availability of trade, it was no longer a theoretical issue. Borders were shut.
You mentioned climate change. I always recall the remake or the sequel on Blade Runner. I think Blade Runner 2049. It opens with a series of inside a series of greenhouses because it's a wasteland outside, and the only place they can grow food is in a greenhouse.
Yeah, in greenhouses, I jokingly have said on a couple of panels and talks, greenhouses are the ultimate DIY and BYO. You bring your own soil, you bring your own climate.
Okay. Now, how does this work? You guys own the actual facility, but you work with operators who grow the food, right? Or are you growing the food?
No, we took a partnering strategy in our portfolio development, and we saw the opportunity that because the controlled environment space was growing fast, it had hit inflection, that the capital needs for the industry had changed. The growth of the greenhouse industry, and I'm talking here about the high tech glass house industry, was pretty steady and stable for the last 30, 40 years. And in the last few years, because of the demand for controlled environment products, the produce that comes out of that has hit inflection. The capital consumption has been pretty significant. And so we saw the opportunity to partner with the best in class greenhouse companies, growers, operators, certainly in North America, and frankly, it's true across the world, and be a partner, a domain aware, domain expert partner, and capital resource for them to accelerate their growth.
While you're hanging out there in your hotel room in Singapore, one of the companies you partnered with, App Harvest, out in Kentucky, went public in a SPAC. We can get into what a SPAC is later, but for the moment, App Harvest in Kentucky building a very high tech greenhouse in the middle of coal country to produce, tomatoes and whatnot in Kentucky. And this greenhouse is huge, as I understand.
Yeah, the greenhouse is about 60 acres. So call it, for simple numbers, 2.5 million square feet. It's one complete structure, steel and glass. Inside of it, it's a classic Dutch style glass house We control CO2 levels, we control temperature, we control humidity, we control the light. And because we're LED, we control the light spectrum. And so we can tune the environment to the specific plant and to the specific time of year and to the outside climate and how we want to create our own unique climate inside. So it is absolutely controlled environment agriculture at a very significant scale. And in the case of App Harvest, Equilibrium is the supplier of capital and technically the owner of the Moorhead facility. And we're also investors in App Harvest, the corporation. So we're shareholders within the corporation. So we participated in the IPO. And we also sit on the board of directors of the operating company, App Harvest.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's just take a brief detour into SPACs. You mentioned IPO. It's not quite an IPO. These special purpose acquisition companies get floated on the stock market, raise some capital, and then go look for an acquisition. This one, called Novus, I think, found App Harvest, in a sense, bought it, right, as an acquisition, and then you raised some, or they raised some additional money as well. So the company is now, as soon as this all closes, will be a publicly listed company, right?
That is correct. Effectively, technically, it's a merger, and as you accurately pointed out, it's an acquisition. And so, by virtue, the day that this gets approved, the merger is approved, App Harvest becomes a public entity. And I think that's the challenge, in that this is a strategy that avails App Harvest of access to the public markets, but as a public entity now, the moment that it happens, you forget that it's a SPAC. It's just a public entity, and therefore it has to perform the way that a public entity would perform, and the expectations of analysts and the expectation of shareholders.
You mentioned the expectations. I don't think App Harvest has harvested a single tomato yet. So they've gone public on this technology promise on the management team, obviously, and all the rest of it, but not on the proven sort of production of tomatoes.
Yeah, I can't comment on a lot of the details, but I will say that App Harvest has done a great job of building out a seasoned, experienced team in the greenhouse sector and across various aspects of produce marketing and the technology space. And so, in a way, they're a signal. App Harvest is a signal of what we as Equilibrium believe is happening in agriculture. And that is that agriculture is becoming a tech-driven industry. Technology has always played a huge role in agriculture, so don't get me wrong historically, but greenhouses and specifically App Harvest's execution is applying high-tech principles and the absorption of high-tech industries to continue to absorb technology and ride a productivity curve. They're applying these principles within the core of agriculture. Whoever would have used the term Moore's law or adaptive systems to 1,000-acre field of lettuce, right? But I think that's precisely in a very real way what's happening in big chunks of the agricultural industry, and that in and of itself is changing the mentality of what ag is.
And you also mentioned that the capital structure, or the ability to access and put capital to work, is another kind of innovation, right? So these are capital intensive in a way. You got to build this facilities and equip them, as you said, with all this technology. Um, so so this is becomes a place where big checks can be written, I imagine, and institutional investors can play a role. Is this a sort of entree point for institutional investors into impact and climate resilience and all the rest?
Well, the short answer is yes.
Or
No, no,
yes.
no. Look. Here's the problem with hyperbole, and that is that you can read a Silicon Valley business plan about alternative proteins or new food, and the business plan always reads the same. There are 7 billion people growing to 9 billion people, and we have to feed the planet, et cetera, et cetera. And that's all true. But the important fact is that that is actually true. Okay, so this isn't like a social networking startup. I shovel in $1 billion and I have a bunch of engineers and I go get a data center and I'm streaming sessions across the world. When it comes to food, you and I still consume a physical molecular thing. I don't care whether you manufacture it or whether I grow it. I'm consuming a piece of protein or I'm consuming a head of lettuce or a salad, which means that I have to have the physical plant in order to be able to execute that. You have to have a place to do that. And if you actually are going to grow enough tomatoes, lettuce, cucumbers, peppers, Madagascar vanilla, pepper to quote unquote feed that planet that was used in that pitch deck, then I need a whole bunch of facilities, which means that this is a capital intensive, asset intensive industry.
And you also need them spread out around the world near major metro areas. You reduce the transportation costs, all those kind of things. So you're basically building food infrastructure almost, it sounds like.
That's exactly right. This is food infrastructure. And as I said early in this interview, COVID has made the word resilience, regional, food security, has made those terms very real. And so, on one hand, it is true that we have moved to a global supply chain, and that has had extraordinary benefits in terms of bringing, in some ways, diversity to and expectations to a growing global population. I should have bananas every day. I should have raspberries every day. I should have fresh greens every day. 40 years ago, even in the US, we grew up thinking that there were winter vegetables and there were summer vegetables. And our expectations today as a global consumer is that we get those all the time. So that's one of the outcomes of globalism. But one of the reverse outcomes of COVID is this move towards, well, we need to have regional resilience. Well, how do I now take and balance the idea of globalism, economy of scale, low cost producer with now bringing things back from a regionalism? And so, one of the things that this harks back to why I'm here in Singapore is that during this COVID period, a number of countries, as a result of the food shocks that they've experienced, and this could be the Middle Eastern countries where 90% of what they eat is imported into those countries, Singapore, where the same phenomenon is taking place, all the way through to China, where they're now very much concerned again about what happens within their borders and how do they, within a very, China is not short necessarily on land mass, but if you actually look at the map, China is not rich in arable land, and they certainly are water stressed. And so they have their set of concerns that are unique when it comes to food security. That's very different from the very much more maybe visible issue with Singapore, that it's a tiny island country and there isn't land, and the Middle East where they have an extreme climate. I mean, by all rights, what could grow in a summertime where you're 45 degrees centigrade during the daytime? I mean, what legitimately should grow there? And yet they have these food security and regional concerns now. So COVID has made those sets of issues very real.
But even in California, sort of a food basket to the world. The climate is changing. Fires, obviously, affecting all of this and other things. So this is you've even got greenhouses, I think, in the middle of California.
Yeah, and that's a great point, which is, look, when California has 1 million acres of forest land on fire, and I think the cautionary comment is because most of us that are listening don't have a real conceptual framework what 1 million acres looks like, and actually the reverse, how small 1 million acres is compared to the landmass of California. So the nasty truth is there's a lot more to burn, unfortunately. And so when 1 million acres goes up, imagine all the dust, ash, contaminants that float onto open fields. And that not only causes concern about economic damage, it potentially causes concern about the soil. It can causes certainly the episodic concern about that current crop and how do you clean it, how do you ensure food safety, and so when you get down to it, companies like Walmart that have, or Kroger's in the US that now each have about, call it 20% market share of our grocery dollars, and that a fair amount of the salad bowl and the fruit bowl of the United States is in these highly threatened environments. The issue of regionality, the issue of food safety, and resilience are no longer theoretical constructs. They're very real.
So institutional investors, I know you had some big institutions in the App Harvest deal, but what about who else is getting in? Are the sovereign wealth funds of these countries getting in?
Yeah, I should note, just to play on that for a second, that the App Harvest pipe, which was effectively the secondary that was done at the time of the merger.
Another acronym: private investment in public equity.
Yes, and the amount of very strong institutional support for that, uh, I think, was a testament to how important they see these trends to be. On the topic of food security, I think one of the phenomenons that we've noticed, just literally in these last few months, is that as countries have started to institute these public policies for food security and regional access to food, many of them have incorporated their sovereign wealth funds into that conversation. And most sovereign wealth funds have mandates which are to invest and generate returns for what is effectively the treasury or the people or the government's capital for the long term. And I think it's been a really interesting phenomenon to watch how, and you see this in the Middle East, and certainly you see this in Singapore, where the sovereign wealth funds have been asked to be a participant within these national policies. In other words, how can investment capital at that level of scale and that level of ownership and time horizon be deployed to actually help these countries build their food systems and build and execute their policies of food security? And that's a fairly important change.
So the sovereign wealth funds are being asked to become impact investors by their own countries to execute on these strategies.
Well, if you use our vocabulary, I think that sovereign wealth funds are asked to be direct participants within building sustainable investments and sustainable investments that have sustainable attributes and impactful. They still have their mission, which is to generate returns, to build industries, to build things that have economic development implications to them, as well as building vibrant, economically viable portfolios of assets. But yes, they're being asked to become part of the execution of public policy.
You mentioned the Dutch greenhouse model. I think they've got onto this early on. It's a tiny little country, not as small as Singapore, obviously, but a very small country, and the second biggest ag exporter to the U.S. Much or all of it from greenhouse uh, production. So this is starting to become. I guess it's not really climate mitigation in the sense of maybe there is some reduced carbon, but it's really climate adaptation. This is like how we're going to live in a climate change world that is fast upon us.
I mean, necessity is the mother of invention, and you look at Holland and you look at Israel, and both those countries are constricted in terms of their landmass. They have very different kinds of environmental constraints. I mean, Holland is fairly far north, so you have long winters, you have darkness, and you have constrained land, and so the innovations that have taken place in those kinds of places have fostered an industry that I would hardly call greenhouse growing in Europe a niche, because upwards of half of what Europe eats comes out of greenhouses. But certainly the necessity has not been here in the US until recently. The awareness of climate adaptation, the awareness of resiliency, and the consumer desire for regional and local have driven these trends. And so we see these now exacerbated by the awareness generated by COVID, and frankly, the awareness that climate creep is very real. And so the effects of climate change are now measurable, and agriculture is ground zero. I mean, I always have joked that if the weather and the climate are in fact really changing, you have to worry about your 1,000 acres of peaches or 1,000 acres of almonds, because that's not a very easy object to move.
Indeed, indeed. Well, Dave, this is a good education in the future of food. It's also a good education in possibly the future of travel, that you've become a human experiment for the 2 week quarantine, just to be able to get out and do some business in Singapore. So I applaud your persistence, and thanks for joining us again.
It's worth doing. So thank you again. We'll talk to you soon.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. You can read more about Dave, Equilibrium, App Harvest, and greenhouses at impactalpha.com. Subscribers receive full access to Impact Alpha content, including deal flow, job postings, and members-only Agents of Impact calls. Use the code BRIEFING100 to get $100 off at impactalpha.com/subscribe. Thanks to Dave Chen and our producer, Isaac Silk. I'm David Bank, editor and CEO of Impact Alpha. Until next time, take care.